Did you just get your interview notice and you're wondering, how do I prepare for this interview? Or you are planning ahead and you want to know, if I'm scheduled for an interview, how do I prepare? What do I bring? What do I do? Well, this video is for you. I'm going to tell you what you should be doing once you get your interview notice, how to prepare for the interview, and what type of questions to expect at your marriage-based green card interview. I am U.S. immigration attorney Lillian Chukura, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. If you filed a green card application through marriage, there are chances that you will be having an interview. So let's get you prepared for that interview. The first thing you need to do is, when you get that interview notice, put it on your calendar, request the day off. Listen, I even suggest taking the day before off so that you are in the mindset of, I have an interview. That should be your only focus for that day. So those are the first two steps. Mark your calendar, take the day off. And then what you want to do next is review your forms and documents that you submitted to USCIS. So when you submit your application, there's certain forms that you filed, which should have been the I-130, the I-130A, and the I-485, which is the green card application. So you want to make sure that you are reviewing those forms, making sure that everything on it is still accurate. So if you have moved, you want to let the officer know that. You have to make a note of it that, oh, I moved, so my application as is not actually correct. So it's important that you review your forms and the documents. So typically, when you file a green card application, you are including supporting documents of your relationship, of your qualifications to get a green card, right? So if you are filing based on marriage and you have your interview, you're looking at all the documents you sent in as proof of your relationship. If there's certain things in there like bank statements, tax returns, things like that that you need to take a look at to just refresh your memory. With bank statements, you want to make sure that you and your spouse are sitting down reviewing the bank statements that you have sent in as proof of your relationship. Because if there's large transactions, if there's money being sent abroad, USCIS officer may use that as a question during your interview to see if you and your spouse are actually using the account jointly. So if there's large transactions like $500 for this, $1,000 for that, please know what those are, right? Know what those are, especially when it's a large amount of money. If you're sending money by MoneyGram, Western Union, via whatever way you're sending money to family member, RIA is another one. Make sure that both spouses know what that is. So if, let's say, the non-US citizen is sending money to family using an app like SendWave, it will show up in your bank statements. So both of you should, at least at a minimum, know what SendWave is, even if you're not clear or remember who the money was sent to. So it's really important that you review your bank statements, make sure that you are aware of every single transaction, and then make sure that you're making notes of documents that could be updated. So you're looking at the documents to see, okay, what did we send in? Make sure we're clear on all the information on those documents and can answer questions about them. But are there any documents in there that needs to be updated that, goes from month to month, like bank statements? So you want to also think about that and make notes of that. The next thing you do after you review the forms and the documents is, like I said, what's the additional documents you want to present as evidence of your relationship? Okay, like I said, you need to look at what you already sent in. Bank statements should be updated. So if you're sending in bank statements with your initial application as proof of your relationship, when it's time for the interview, because it's usually months apart, include those months, right? And then if there's any tax returns, so typically depending on when you file, you may not have filed a joint tax return as husband and wife yet, right? Spouses, depending on when you get married, let's say you get married in June, you would not have a joint tax return in June to file for a green card application. However, if your interview is in the March of the following year or June of the following year, there's a tax season that has happened and you are expected to have filed taxes together. So just pay attention to that, because depending on where you fall within that, you may be expected to be presenting tax returns showing that you filed married filing jointly or married filing separately. You can also update pictures if you've taken trips together, if you've had, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, whatever has happened within the time of filing and your interview. If you've went to a party, if you went to a wedding, all those things, definitely document them, include the pictures. By the way, if you are finding this video helpful, please go ahead and hit the like button and tell me in the comments any questions you may have so far as you're watching this video. The next thing you need to do when preparing for your interview is be ready to answer the questions. Answering the questions at your interview can make or break your whole green card application process. So being prepared to actually answer the questions is going to make your life a whole lot easier. For my clients, we do a full mock interview. If there's issues in the case that we need to address, I am questioning them at the mock interview as if I'm the officer, going over the things that the officer may have an issue with in their case. So preparing for the interview includes preparing to answer certain questions. And for marriage-based interviews, the type of questions you need to be ready to answer are questions about you, your spouse, and your life together. 99.9% of the time, one of the first questions you're going to get at a marriage-based interview is, how did you meet? How did you meet your spouse? Where did you meet? When did you meet? Right? You need to be ready to answer that question. And your answer needs to match your spouse's answers. If your spouse mentions specific people in their answer, just know when you're asked the same question, the officer is going to expect you to mention those specific people as well. So let's say you and your spouse go into the interview, your spouse, the US citizen, goes in first, and they're asked, how did you meet your spouse? And they say, I met my spouse at a friend's birthday party. What friend? Jennifer's birthday party. When you come into the room and the officer asks you, how did you meet? Oh, we met at a party. It was like someone she knows birthday. Someone invited me. Okay, what's the name of the person that it was their birthday? So now the officer has more information, not just that you met at a birthday party, but whose birthday party it was. So they're expecting you to be able to tell them whose birthday party it is. And then if you're like, no, I think it was John or Jack. She said Jennifer. You're saying John and Jack. So that's going to raise questions in the officer's mind already, right? Did they rehearse this? Is this not actually how they met? So just know that's going to be the first question, and your answers to the first question can determine how hard or easy the rest of the interview goes. The next set of questions are going to be about your wedding. Who was there? When did you get married? Of course, you should know when you got married. Like, when is your anniversary? What's your spouse's full name? What's your spouse's date of birth? When did you meet? When did you go on your first date? Where did you go on your first date? And that's the part that always gets people. When they start asking when and where you went on your first date, people Reasonable people can have different answers. So that's why I say it's good to talk to your spouse ahead of time to understand what's their answer versus what's your answer. I've had spouses go on a coffee, meet for coffee before they then go for dinner on another date. And for one of the spouses, the coffee date was a first date. For the other spouse, the dinner date was the first date. So it's really good to talk about these things because you get to learn about your spouse in the process as well, because you two may not process information the same way. It's really good to talk about this with your spouse ahead of time, because you don't want to get to the interview and the officer asks you, where did you go on your first date and when did you go on your first date, and you and your spouse are giving completely different answers. Those raise red flags for the officer, and it's going to want to get more information out of you two to basically see, are these people lying to me? Is this marriage actually real? But the issue is, it's not that the marriage is not real, it's that you two have different answers for what you consider a first date. So please have those conversations ahead of time. The officer may ask you, where did you get married? Who was there? They're asking you who, when, and where. Who, when, and where for most of the things that happen in your relationship, because they want to compare your answers. Because if at your wedding you're saying, oh, my parents were there, and then your spouse is saying, oh, it was just the two of us, no one else was there, those are things that the officer is picking up on and making notes of. So you really want to be aware that those questions matter. There's no throwaway question at your marriage-based interview. No question is a throwaway question. If they're asking you where you live, if they're making conversation, so how long have y'all lived there? Oh, I think that town is interesting. It's like, yeah, I haven't lived there long, but I'm getting used to it. That raises a question in the officer, because they're now going to flip through and see when you said you moved there. Because if you're saying you haven't lived there long, but your forms say that you've lived there for 2-3 years, raises questions. So your answers to everything you tell the officer after you're sworn in counts. It can shape the rest of the interview. So it's really important that you are prepared to answer these questions. The next set of questions will be about your daily life. Who gets up first? What type of house do you live in? Is it an apartment? Is it a house? All those type of questions about your house. And then there's going to be questions about your employment. Where does your spouse work? What are their hours at work? Where do you work? What are your hours? And if your spouse doesn't work a regular schedule, or you don't work a regular schedule, the officer may ask you, okay, last week, since your schedule is not regular, last week, what hours did you work? What days did you work? And they're going to ask your spouse the same questions to basically see if your answers match. And if your answers do not match, problems. So again, you want to be prepared for these types of questions. If you want to practice these questions and you want a PDF of the type of questions that generally are asked just to help you prepare for these interviews, feel free to tell me and I may make my PDF available to you all. So the more interest there is in it, the more likelihood I am to actually make it available. So let's do a quick recap. First, you want to make sure that you are putting the interview date in your calendar. You are asking for the day off and the day before off if possible, but at least the day off. You are reviewing your forms and the documents you sent in with your initial application, making sure that you know everything that's in there. If there's anything that needs to be updated in your forms, for example, if you moved, if you change your phone number, if you change work, you want to make notes of that because you need to let the officer know. You also want to make sure that you are looking at what additional documents you can bring to prove your relationship. So updated bank statements, tax returns, pictures, things like that. And finally, you want to prepare for the questions, because the questions that are asked at the interview is really, really, really going to make a difference. Because if you and your spouse are giving different answers to basic questions like how did you meet, that's going to reflect negatively on your case. Even if you have great documentation of your relationship, but you can't answer basic questions about each other and your relationship, it's going to raise a red flag for the officer every single time. If you are going through this interview process and you want a little extra help with a mock interview, or to see if there's things in your case that are going to raise red flags for the officer, feel free to reach out. We do offer mock interviews. You can reach us at Lillylegal.com or 508-443-1788. We are more than happy to help you with this process.